It was another chaotic morning at JFK International Airport, and the holiday rush had the terminal bustling with travelers eager to reach their destinations. Elena Ramirez, a flight attendant with 8 years of experience, was no stranger to the hustle and grind of busy travel seasons. She prided herself on being efficient, sharp, and professional. Today, however, the delays had her nerves fraying. An unexpected maintenance issue had left her crew scrambling to get the plane ready on time, and Elena hadn't had her usual pre-flight coffee. Passengers began boarding Flight 821 to Miami, and Elena stood at her post, forcing a smile as she greeted them. The first-class passengers strode in first, followed by business class, then economy. She nodded politely at each, mentally cataloging the usual mix of seasoned travelers, families wrangling toddlers, and the occasional person who seemed completely lost. It was during the steady stream of economy passengers that she noticed her. The woman was striking in her understated elegance, tall, with flawless skin and a calm, confident demeanor. She wore a simple cardigan and jeans, her hair pulled back into a sleek bun, and carried a worn leather tote that seemed out of place among the shiny designer luggage of other travelers. Elena couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something about the woman's presence exuded authority. "Good morning," the woman said softly as she stepped aboard. Elena barely looked up, her stress clouding her judgment. "Welcome," she muttered, her tone perfunctory. She didn't notice the raised eyebrows of the passengers behind the woman, who seemed slightly taken aback by Elena's dismissiveness. The boarding process dragged on, with overhead bins filling quickly and impatient murmurs rippling through the cabin. Elena, already irritable, felt her annoyance bubbling over when the elegant woman from earlier flagged her down. "Excuse me," the woman said politely. "Could I trouble you for a bottle of water?" Elena didn't even pause her current task of adjusting a passenger's luggage. "Drinks are served after takeoff," she said curtly without turning around. The woman hesitated, clearly not used to being brushed off. "I understand," she said, her tone still calm. "But it's for medication I need to take." Elena sighed audibly, glancing at the woman for the first time since boarding. Something about her calm persistence irritated her more than it should have. She grabbed a water bottle from the galley and handed it to the woman with a clipped, "Here." "Thank you," the woman said, her tone polite but firm, as if she were cataloging the interaction for later. As the plane began to taxi, Elena kept a close eye on her section, her irritation with the woman lingering. She noticed the woman jotting something down on her phone, her expression focused. Elena assumed she was just another high-maintenance passenger who would find something to complain about, and the thought made her roll her eyes internally. The flight progressed uneventfully for the first hour. Passengers settled into their routines, reading, watching movies, or napping. The elegant woman, seated in economy, quietly worked on her phone, occasionally glancing out the window. When the meal service began, Elena found herself face to face with the woman again. "Excuse me," the woman said as Elena passed by. "Could you let me know if the vegetarian option contains peanuts? I have an allergy." Elena, already dealing with a passenger in first class who was unhappy with their meal, barely concealed her impatience. "I'll check," she said tersely, walking off without waiting for a response. By the time she returned, she had completely forgotten about the woman's request. It wasn't until the woman gently reminded her that Elena snapped, "Look, I have a lot of people to serve here. If you have dietary restrictions, maybe let us know ahead of time next time." "Okay." The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't argue. Instead, she calmly said, "Thank you for your time," and resumed her quiet demeanor. As the flight continued, murmurs began to spread among the passengers. A man seated near the woman leaned over to whisper to his wife, who glanced at Elena disapprovingly. A young couple nearby exchanged looks, their expressions a mix of curiosity and indignation. Elena noticed the whispers but dismissed them. She was used to passengers gossiping and didn't think much of it. What she couldn't shake, however, was the nagging feeling that she had made a mistake. Something about the woman's calm, composed demeanor made Elena feel small, as if she had failed some unspoken test. The tension came to a head when the woman rang the call button, signaling for assistance. Elena approached with a forced smile, her tone clipped as she said, "What can I do for you?" The woman gestured to the menu card. "I wanted to clarify something about the beverages," she said, her tone neutral. Elena didn't even let her finish. "We've already gone through the service," she snapped. "If you have complaints, I suggest you send them to the airline after we land. I'm just here to serve." The cabin went silent. Passengers turned in their seats to watch the interaction unfold. The woman's face remained calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Disappointment, perhaps, or resolve. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a sleek leather notebook. "Thank you for your response," she said, her tone now icily polite. "I'll make a note of it." Elena froze. Something about the way the woman said it sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't a threat, but it carried the weight of authority. For the first time, Elena wondered who this woman really was. And then it happened. A nervous flight attendant from the front of the plane hurried toward Elena, her face pale. She whispered something in Elena's ear that made her blood run cold. "That's her," the other flight attendant said, barely above a whisper. "She's the new CEO." Elena's heart stopped. She turned to look at the woman, who now sat quietly, her pen poised over her notebook, making notes with the calm precision of someone who had already won. The realization hit Elena like a freight train. She had spent the entire flight dismissing and disrespecting the very person who had the power to determine her future. And now, it was too late. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing as she tried to process the bombshell revelation. The new CEO. This woman. The idea seemed almost impossible to her. Maya didn't fit the stereotypical image Elena had in her mind of a high-powered executive. No sharp suit, no entourage, no visible signs of wealth or authority. Yet the truth was undeniable, and the weight of her mistake began to sink in. She could feel the heat rising to her face as the reality of her behavior over the past few hours replayed vividly in her mind. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe the other flight attendant was wrong. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But when she glanced at Maya, who was still calmly jotting notes in her notebook, her confidence wavered. This wasn't the behavior of an ordinary passenger. This was someone used to taking charge, observing, and making decisions that mattered. The other passengers, sensing something unusual, were now fully alert. Whispers grew louder, eyes darting between Elena and Maya. A man seated across the aisle from Maya leaned over and said, loud enough for Elena to hear, "You handled that very well." Most people would have lost their cool by now. Maya smiled politely but didn't respond. She seemed to be in control of the entire cabin's energy without saying a word. Elena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She needed to salvage the situation. But how? An apology, a gesture of goodwill. But every idea felt hollow, like trying to patch a sinking ship with tape. As the flight progressed, Elena's unease only grew. She found herself hyper-aware of every move Maya made. When Maya asked for a cup of tea during the second service, Elena rushed to prepare it, her hands trembling slightly. She placed the cup on Maya's tray with a forced smile, saying, "Here you go, ma'am. I hope this makes up for earlier." Maya looked up, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said, her tone neutral but her words measured. "It's appreciated." The brief exchange was witnessed by several passengers, and the tension in the air was palpable. Elena felt the weight of their gazes, silently judging her, dissecting her every action. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the hum of the engine seemed louder than ever. The turbulence began shortly after. The captain announced it over the intercom, advising everyone to remain seated and buckle their seatbelts. Elena used the momentary distraction to retreat to the galley, where she could regroup and think. But even in the relative quiet of the galley, her thoughts were anything but calm. What if she reports me? Elena wondered, her chest tightening. She thought about her career, years of hard work, countless flights, all of it potentially undone by one terrible day. And the worst part was, she couldn't even argue. Maya had been nothing but polite and composed, while Alina had allowed her stress and assumptions to dictate her actions. One of her colleagues, a junior flight attendant named Sarah, stepped into the galley and gave Alina a sympathetic look. "Hey, are you okay? You seem off." Alina forced a laugh. "Just a long day," she said, avoiding Sarah's eyes. Sarah hesitated, then said, "I don't know what's going on, but maybe you should take it easy. The passengers are starting to notice." Alina nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. Sarah didn't know the half of it. Back in the cabin, the turbulence had subsided, and passengers were settling back into their routines. But the atmosphere remained tense. Maya had closed her notebook and was now quietly reading on her tablet, seemingly unbothered. But every so often, Alina caught her glancing around the cabin, as if taking in the overall experience. Alina's anxiety spiked when another passenger, a middle-aged man in a business suit, approached Maya and struck up a conversation. He leaned against her seat, clearly intrigued. "I couldn't help but overhear earlier," he said, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and admiration. "You handled that situation so gracefully. Are you in customer service by any chance?" Maya gave a soft laugh. "Something like that," she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. The man chuckled. "Well, whatever you do, you're clearly a pro. Not many people can stay that calm under pressure." Alina, overhearing from the galley, felt her face flush with shame. The man's words were like a spotlight on her failure, a reminder of how poorly she had handled herself. As the flight neared its descent into Miami, Alina's nerves reached a breaking point. She knew that once they landed, everything would come to a head. Maya hadn't said anything directly about her behavior, but Alina could feel the weight of her silence. It wasn't a question of if she would address it. It was a question of when. The final service began, and Alina decided to make one last attempt to redeem herself. She prepared a small tray with a selection of premium snacks and personally delivered it to Maya's seat. "This is for you, compliments of the crew," Alina said, her voice trembling slightly. I just want to apologize if I've been anything less than professional today. It's been a hectic flight, but that's no excuse." Maya looked up at her, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Alina felt the silence stretch like a taut string about to snap. "Thank you for the gesture," Maya said finally, her tone measured. "I appreciate the effort. But professionalism isn't about what happens when things are easy. It's about how you handle yourself when they're not." Alina felt her stomach drop. The words weren't harsh, but they were pointed, cutting through her like a blade. As the plane began its final descent, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that she had already lost. Maya had said very little, but her presence alone had shifted the dynamic of the entire flight. When the plane touched down and passengers began to disembark, Alina braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. She stood by the exit, forcing a smile as passengers filed past, her heart pounding as Maya approached. Maya paused at the door, her eyes meeting Alina's. "Thank you for the flight," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I'll be sure to share my experience with the airline." Alina swallowed hard, managing a week. "Have a good day." As Maya disappeared into the terminal, Alina felt a sinking weight in her chest. The whispers among the passengers, the quiet disapproval in Maya's voice, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. She had made a terrible mistake, and there was no going back. Alina couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she closed the overhead compartments and tidied the galley one last time. The flight had landed, the passengers had disembarked, and the aircraft now sat empty. But the air still felt heavy, charged with unspoken tension. She could hear the faint echoes of the captain chatting with the ground crew and her fellow attendants gathering their belongings. For everyone else, the flight was over. For Alina, the fallout was just beginning. She replayed Maya's parting words in her mind. "I'll be sure to share my experience with the airline." It wasn't a threat. But it didn't need to be. Maya had made it clear that Elena's actions wouldn't go unnoticed. And if what Sarah had whispered earlier was true, that Maya was the new CEO, then those words carried the weight of a career-ending hammer about to drop. "Elena, you coming?" Sarah's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Yeah," Elena said quickly, forcing herself to move. "I'll catch up." As she made her way off the plane, her steps felt heavier with each passing moment. The bustling activity of the airport greeted her as she stepped into the terminal, where passengers from other flights hurried to their gates, families reunited, and airport staff zipped around on carts. It was chaos, but to Elena it felt muted, as if she were walking underwater. She scanned the terminal and spotted Maya near a bank of windows, calmly speaking with a man in a dark suit. Elena hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the gnawing need to address the situation. She knew she couldn't avoid this confrontation. If she didn't approach Maya now, the conversation would likely happen in a far less forgiving setting, like a meeting with HR. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and walked toward Maya. "Excuse me, ma'am," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. Maya turned to face her, her expression composed but unreadable. Up close, the aura of authority around her was even more palpable. "I just wanted to apologize again," Elena said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I know my behavior earlier was unacceptable. I was stressed and overwhelmed, but that's no excuse for the way I treated you. I understand if you're upset, and I wanted to say I'm sorry." Maya studied her for a long moment, her silence stretching painfully. The man beside her glanced between them, clearly curious but choosing to stay silent. Finally, Maya spoke. "I appreciate your apology," she said, her tone measured. "But an apology doesn't erase what happened. Do you know what the real issue is here?" Elena shook her head, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It's not just about me," Maya continued. "It's about how you approach your job, how you see people. When you look at someone like me, someone who doesn't fit your expectations, how do you decide how to treat them? That's the question you need to answer, not for me, but for yourself." Elena felt her face flush with shame. She wanted to protest, to say that she wasn't like that she treated everyone the same. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. Her stress, her biases, her assumptions, they had all played a role in how she had treated Maya. "I understand," Elena said quietly. "I'll do better. I promise." Maya gave a small nod, her expression softening slightly. "I hope so," she said, "because this isn't just about one flight. It's about the bigger picture, how we treat each other, how we create an environment where everyone feels valued. That's what I'm trying to build in this airline. And that starts with people like you." The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. Maya wasn't just chastising her. She was laying out a vision, a standard, one that Elena had fallen painfully short of. Before Elena could respond, the man in the suit stepped forward. "Miss Thomas, the car is ready," he said, addressing Maya. Maya nodded, then turned back to Elena. "I'll leave it at this. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do next." With that, she walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Elena watched her go, feeling this strange mix of relief and dread. Maya hadn't explicitly said what would happen next, but her words left no doubt that there would be consequences. Elena spent the rest of the evening in a daze, unable to shake the weight of the encounter. She barely registered the ride home, the familiar sights of her neighborhood blurring into the background. By the time she unlocked her apartment door, exhaustion had fully set in. She dropped her bag on the couch and sank into the nearest chair, staring blankly at the floor. Her mind raced with thoughts of what the next day would bring. Would she be called into a meeting with her supervisor? Would she be suspended? Fired? The uncertainty was suffocating. But as she sat there, another thought began to creep in. A deeper, more uncomfortable realization. Maya's words had struck a chord. Elena had always seen herself as a hard-working professional, someone who took pride in her job. But today had shown her a side of herself she wasn't proud of. The next morning, Elena arrived at the crew briefing room earlier than usual, her nerves frayed. The airline's base manager, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, was waiting for her. "Elena," Linda said, her tone neutral but firm. "Ms. Thomas has requested a meeting with you this morning. She'll be here in an hour." Elena nodded, her stomach twisting into knots. This was it, the moment of reckoning. When Maya walked into the meeting room an hour later, she was accompanied by 2 other executives. Her presence commanded attention, and even Linda, who rarely showed deference to anyone, straightened her posture. "Elena," Maya began, her tone calm but serious, "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to understand. Walk me through what happened yesterday, from your perspective." Elena swallowed hard, then began recounting the events of the flight. She didn't try to make excuses. She owned up to her behavior, her assumptions, and her mistakes. As she spoke, she saw Maya watching her intently, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp. When Elena finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Maya spoke. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. "It takes courage to admit when we've fallen short, and I appreciate that you're willing to learn from this experience." Elena's breath caught. She had expected anger, reprimands, maybe even termination, but Maya's tone was understanding. That said, Maya continued, "There's work to be done. I'm implementing a new training program for all our staff, focused on diversity, empathy, and customer service, and I want you to be part of the first group to go through it. Consider this your second chance." Elena nodded, relief flooding her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Maya stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Make the most of it," she said, "because the next time we meet, I expect to see a flight attendant who embodies the values this airline stands for." As Maya walked out of the room, Elena felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a newfound determination. This wasn't just about saving her job, it was about becoming the person she wanted to be. For the first time in years, she felt like she was on the path to something better. And it all started with the moment she realized who Maya really was. The meeting with Maya lingered in Elena's mind long after it ended. As she walked out of the room, the relief of not being fired was tempered by the heavy weight of accountability. The CEO's calm but pointed words echoed in her ears. "This isn't about punishment. It's about what you choose to do next." Elena realized this wasn't just a second chance at her job. It was an opportunity to confront parts of herself she had long ignored. Returning to her duties felt surreal. Her coworkers treated her cautiously, their usual banter replaced by polite distance. Word had spread quickly that Elena had been called into a meeting with the CEO, though the details remained a mystery. Some colleagues speculated that she had been reprimanded. Others assumed she was being groomed for a leadership role. But Elena, plagued by guilt and self-reflection, didn't correct them. She kept her head down, avoiding unnecessary conversations, and focused on completing her shifts with precision. It wasn't long before the ripple effects of the incident began to surface. The airline's internal communication system buzzed with announcements about the new diversity and empathy training program Maya had mentioned. All staff were required to attend the sessions, but Elena and a handful of others were placed in the inaugural group. The move sparked whispers among the crew. "I heard it's because someone mistreated a VIP passenger," one flight attendant murmured in the break room. "More like a CEO," another added knowingly. "Elena's been acting weird ever since." "You think it was her?" Elena heard the rumors but said nothing. She didn't need their judgment. She was already drowning in her own. The first training session was scheduled for the following week, and Elena arrived early, determined to approach it with an open mind. The room was filled with a mix of flight attendants, ground crew, and even a few supervisors, all seated in small groups around round tables. A trainer, a poised woman with years of experience in conflict resolution, welcomed everyone warmly before diving into the material. The session was unlike anything Alina had expected. Rather than focusing on dry corporate policies, the trainer encouraged open dialogue, sharing of personal experiences, and interactive exercises designed to challenge unconscious biases. One activity involved pairing up with a colleague and discussing a time they felt unfairly judged. Alina was paired with Marcus, a ground crew supervisor she had seen in passing but never spoken to. Marcus, a tall man with a booming voice and an easy laugh, shared a story about being questioned repeatedly by security while in uniform simply because he was black. "It didn't matter that I had my badge, my credentials, or my uniform," Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration. "They saw me and assumed I didn't belong." Alina nodded, her throat tightening as she listened. For the first time, she felt the sting of recognition, not of his specific experience, but of her own role in perpetuating similar assumptions. When it was her turn to share, she hesitated. I don't really have a story like that," she said finally. "But I think I've been the person making those assumptions, and I'm trying to figure out how to be better." Marcus gave her a long, considering look before nodding. "Acknowledging it is the first step," he said. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong." As the training progressed, Alina found herself reflecting on moments in her career when she had unconsciously let her biases influence her actions. The training wasn't just opening her eyes to systemic issues, it was forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. But the fallout from her actions didn't stop at personal revelations. The incident with Maya had sparked a broader conversation within the airline. Passengers who had witnessed the exchange on the flight had taken to social media, sharing their accounts of the event. One post, written by a passenger seated near Maya, went viral. "I was on Flight 821 and witnessed one of the most graceful takedowns I've ever seen. A flight attendant treated a black woman in economy class with complete disrespect, only to find out she was the airline's CEO. The CEO didn't raise her voice or cause a scene. She just calmly made it clear that she expected better. Honestly, we all do." The post was accompanied by a picture of Maya, her profile silhouetted against the airplane window, a quiet but commanding presence even in stillness. The airline's PR team scrambled to respond. While the post painted Maya in a positive light, it also highlighted the company's shortcomings in training its staff. Maya herself issued a statement, emphasizing the airline's commitment to addressing the incident and ensuring a more inclusive environment. "We are only as strong as the values we uphold," the statement read. "This is an opportunity for growth, not just for the individual involved, but for our organization as a whole. We will be better." For Alina, the public scrutiny was a double-edged sword. On one hand, she was grateful that Maya had refrained from naming her directly. On the other, she felt exposed, knowing that every whisper in the crew lounge, every sideways glance from a colleague, was tied to her actions. Despite the discomfort, Alina threw herself into the training, determined to prove, to herself as much as anyone else, that she was capable of change. She volunteered for additional sessions, participated in focus groups, and even began mentoring newer flight attendants on the importance of empathy and professionalism. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. A few weeks after the training began, Alina received an email from Maya's office, inviting her to participate in a pilot program for crew members aspiring to leadership roles. The email was brief and formal, but the subtext was clear. Maya was watching her progress. The invitation reignited a spark of hope in Alina. It wasn't redemption, at least not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. Still, the path forward wasn't without challenges. Some colleagues resented her for what they perceived as preferential treatment, while others viewed her as a cautionary tale. Passengers, too, seemed more watchful, as if expecting her to slip up. One particularly difficult flight tested Alina's resolve. A passenger in first class became irate over a seating mix-up, yelling at Alina and accusing her of incompetence. The old Alina might have snapped back or dismissed his concerns, but this time she took a deep breath, listened carefully, and calmly de-escalated the situation. As the passenger finally settled down, another flight attendant whispered, "I don't know how you kept your cool." That was impressive. Elena smiled faintly. "I'm just trying to do better," she said. And for the first time, in a long while, she felt like she truly was. As the weeks passed, the consequences of the incident on Flight 821 rippled far beyond Elena's personal journey. Within the airline, the new training program became a cornerstone of the company's culture shift. Under Maya's leadership, the initiative expanded rapidly, encompassing not only flight attendants but also ground crew, customer service representatives, and even management. The focus wasn't just on addressing overt discrimination. It delved into the subtle biases and assumptions that could color interactions in ways employees might not even realize. The session sparked uncomfortable but necessary conversations. Employees who had worked together for years began sharing stories they had never spoken of before. A veteran pilot recounted how passengers often mistook her for a flight attendant because she was a woman. A customer service agent spoke of being dismissed or ignored by travelers who assumed he didn't speak fluent English because of his accent. For Elena, these stories were eye-opening. She realized how often she had witnessed such moments, and, whether out of apathy or discomfort, chosen to stay silent. Now she found herself speaking up, not just in training sessions, but in everyday situations. One evening, while waiting for a shuttle after a late flight, Elena overheard a conversation between two colleagues. "I don't get what all the fuss is about," one said dismissively. "People are way too sensitive these days. It's just a job." "Yeah," the other agreed. "If you can't handle a little attitude from a flight attendant, maybe you shouldn't fly." Elena felt her stomach twist. A few months ago, she might have agreed, or at least kept her head down and pretended not to hear. But now, she couldn't let it go. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into the conversation. "I used to think like that too. But it's not just about a little attitude. It's about respect. People deserve to feel safe and valued, no matter who they are or where they're sitting on the plane." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the other two looked at her in surprise. Then one of them, a younger flight attendant, nodded slowly. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. "I guess I've been guilty of that too." Moments like this became more frequent, not just for Elena, but for the airline as a whole. Maya's leadership was reshaping the company's reputation, and passengers began to notice. Online forums and social media posts praised the airline's improved service and commitment to inclusivity. One viral video featured a passenger tearfully recounting how a flight attendant had gone out of her way to accommodate her son's autism-related needs, a sharp contrast to the indifferent treatment she had experienced on other airlines. The impact wasn't limited to passengers. Employees, too, began to feel the difference. A sense of pride and accountability spread through the ranks. People who had once seen their jobs as just another paycheck started to view them as opportunities to make a positive impact on others. But not everyone welcomed the change. Some employees grumbled about the mandatory training sessions and the increased scrutiny. A few even quit, claiming the new policies were overly restrictive or unnecessary. Elena heard the complaints but didn't let them deter her. She had seen firsthand how much harm indifference and bias could cause, and she was determined to be part of the solution, not the problem. Her commitment didn't go unnoticed. During a quarterly staff meeting, Maya personally addressed the employees via a live video feed. "This is a time of transformation," Maya said, her voice steady and confident. "Change is never easy, but it's necessary. I've seen incredible progress over the past few months, and I want to recognize those who have gone above and beyond to embody the values we stand for." Elena's heart skipped a beat as Maya continued. One such individual is Elena Ramirez, a flight attendant who has turned a moment of reflection into a mission for growth and leadership. Elena, thank you for your dedication and for showing us all what it means to learn and lead. The room erupted in applause, and Elena felt her cheeks flush with a mix of pride and humility. It wasn't just the recognition that moved her. It was the realization that she had become part of something bigger than herself. Outside of work, the incident had also sparked conversations in the broader community. News outlets picked up on the story of Maya's undercover flight and her handling of the situation, framing it as a powerful example of leadership and accountability. Discussions about workplace bias and the importance of empathy spread across social media, reaching audiences far beyond the airline industry. Elena began receiving messages from friends and acquaintances who had heard about her role in the story. Some expressed surprise, while others shared their own experiences with bias or discrimination. One message from an old high school friend stood out to her. "Elena, I read about what happened, and I just want to say thank you for owning up to your mistakes. A lot of people wouldn't have the courage to do that. It gives me hope that people can change." The words brought tears to Elena's eyes. She hadn't realized how much her journey could inspire others, even those she hadn't spoken to in years. But the most profound impact came from Maya herself. Despite her demanding schedule, the CEO took the time to mentor employees who showed promise and dedication. One day, Elena was surprised to receive an invitation to join a small leadership workshop led by Maya. During the workshop, Maya shared her vision for the airline and her hopes for its future. She spoke candidly about her own experiences with discrimination and the challenges of navigating a world that often underestimated her. "We all have moments where we're tested," Maya said, her eyes scanning the room. "Moments where we have to decide who we want to be. Those decisions don't just define our careers, they define our lives. So ask yourself, when that moment comes, what will you choose?" The question lingered with Elena long after the workshop ended. She thought about how far she had come. From the stressed and dismissive flight attendant on Flight 821 to someone striving to make a difference. And she realized that while she still had a lot to learn, she was on the right path. The changes within the airline continued to grow, reaching new heights. Customer satisfaction soared, employee turnover decreased, and the company began to receive accolades for its progressive policies. Elena watched with pride as the airline she once took for granted became a leader in the industry. And through it all, she carried Maya's question with her. What will you choose? It became her guiding principle, shaping not just her work, but her interactions with everyone she encountered. Because in the end, Elena realized the most important choices weren't the ones she made in the air. They were the ones she made every day on the ground. Months after the incident on Flight 821, Elena found herself standing on a stage at the airline's annual employee recognition gala. The spotlight was on her, and the applause from her peers filled the large hall. She adjusted the microphone nervously, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't a celebration of her career, it was an acknowledgement of her transformation. "Thank you," Elena began, her voice trembling slightly. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today, let alone for something like this. If I'm being honest, this isn't the kind of recognition I thought I'd deserve after what happened on that flight. But I want to share a little about that experience, not because it was my proudest moment, but because it was the one that taught me the most." She paused, scanning the faces of her colleagues, who listened intently. Among them, Maya sat in the front row, her expression calm but encouraging. "On that day, I made assumptions. I let my stress, my biases, and my lack of self-awareness cloud my judgment. I treated someone unfairly, someone who deserved respect, not because of her title or position, but simply because she's a person. And I'll never forget how she handled it, with grace, patience, and strength." Elena's voice steadied as she continued. "That experience forced me to confront parts of myself I didn't want to see. It made me realize that being good at my job isn't just about following protocols or working efficiently. It's about empathy, humility, and the willingness to grow." The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. When Maya, our CEO, gave me a second chance, she didn't just give me an opportunity to keep my job. She gave me a challenge to become better, not just for myself, but for everyone I interact with. I've taken that challenge to heart, and it's changed the way I see the world. She ended her speech with a heartfelt thank you, and stepped off the stage to another round of applause. Maya stood to greet her, offering a handshake that turned into a warm pat on the shoulder. "Well said, Elena," she said quietly. "That took courage." Elena nodded, feeling the surge of pride. She had come a long way from the nervous, defensive flight attendant who had fumbled her way through an apology months ago. But the event was just the beginning of a larger journey for Elena and the airline. The changes Maya had implemented, from the training programs to the leadership workshops, were beginning to bear fruit. The airline had become a model for inclusivity and customer care, with passenger satisfaction ratings reaching new heights. Elena's role within the company began to evolve as well. She was promoted to a team lead position, where she could mentor new hires and help shape the next generation of flight attendants. She poured her energy into fostering a supportive and respectful environment, drawing on her own experiences to guide others. One day, during a training session for new recruits, a young flight attendant raised her hand. "Why is this kind of training so important?" she asked. "I mean, as long as we're polite and professional, isn't that enough?" Elena smiled, recognizing her own former mindset in the question. "I used to think that too," she admitted. "But politeness isn't the same as respect, and professionalism doesn't replace empathy. It's not just about how you act when things are going smoothly. It's about how you respond when they're not." The recruits nodded thoughtfully, and Elena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned her mistakes into lessons, not just for herself but for others. Outside of work, the incident continued to shape her personal life. Elena began volunteering with community programs that focused on fostering dialogue and understanding between diverse groups. She became an advocate for empathy and inclusion, speaking at local events and even writing an op-ed about her experience for a major newspaper. Her words resonated with readers, sparking conversations about the subtle ways bias can manifest and the importance of accountability. Comments flooded in from people who shared their own stories of prejudice, both as victims and as those who had been forced to confront their own biases. But the most poignant moment came when Elena received a handwritten letter from a passenger who had been on Flight 821. "Dear Elena," it began, "I was on that flight, sitting a few rows behind Miss Thomas. I saw the way things unfolded, and I'll admit, I judged you harshly in the moment. But reading about your journey since then has changed my perspective. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, and even more courage to change. Thank you for showing that growth is possible, not just for yourself but for all of us." The letter brought tears to Elena's eyes. It was a reminder of how far she had come and how much impact one person's growth could have on others. As the months turned into years, Elena continued to grow in her role, eventually earning a position in the corporate office as part of the team responsible for shaping the airline's training and service policies. She worked closely with Maya, whose leadership remained a constant source of inspiration. One day, during a quiet moment in a boardroom after a particularly productive meeting, Elena turned to Maya. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Maya said. "Why did you give me a second chance?" Elena asked. "You could have written me off, and no one would have blamed you." Maya smiled thoughtfully. "Because I saw potential," she said. "Not just in you, but in what your journey could represent. People aren't perfect, Elena. We all make mistakes, but the real test is whether we learn from them. And you did." Elena nodded, the words sinking in deeply. Maya's belief in her had been the catalyst for everything that followed, and she vowed never to take that second chance for granted. The experience on Flight 821 had transformed Elena, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. It had taught her the power of accountability, the importance of empathy, and the strength it took to confront one's own flaws. And it had left her with a guiding principle she carried into every aspect of her life. Growth isn't about perfection. It's about choosing, every day, to be better than you were before. And for Elena, that choice had made all the difference.